Hey there, folks. Welcome back to Succinct Psychology, or as we like to call it, Succinct. My name is Jaia Hendrickson, and this video is going to be a continuation of my two previous videos covering Chapter 11 in Principles of Social Psychology, looking at working groups. While at least some scholars are skeptical of the importance of groupthink in real group decisions, many others have suggested that groupthink was involved in a number of well-known and important but very poor decisions made by government and business groups. Decisions that were analyzed in terms of groupthink include the decision to invade Iraq by President George Bush and his advisors, the decision of President John Kennedy and his advisors to commit the US forces to an invasion of Cuba, and the lack of responses to warnings on the attack on Pearl Harbor in Hawaii in 1941. Careful analysis of the decision-making process in these cases have documented the role of conformity pressures. In fact, the group process often seems to be arranged to maximize the amount of conformity rather than to foster free and open discussion. In the meeting of the Bay of Pigs Advisory Committee, for instance, President Kennedy sometimes demanded that the group members give a voice vote regarding their individual opinions before the group actually discussed the pros and cons of a new idea. The result of these conformity pressures is a general unwillingness to express ideas that don't match the group norm. The pressure for conformity also leads to the situation in which only a few of the group members are actually involved in the conversation, whereas the others don't express any opinions at all. Because little or no dissent is expressed in the group members come to believe that they're in complete agreement. In some cases, the leader may even select individuals, known as mind guards, whose job it is to help quash dissent and to increase conformity to the leader's opinion. So we see here antecedents and outcomes of groupthink. In the antecedent conditions, we have time pressures and stress, high cohesiveness and social identity, isolation from other sources of information, and then directive authoritative leadership, which leads to symptoms of groupthink, which are illusions of invulnerability, illusions of unanimity, in-group favoritism, little search for new information, belief in morality of the group, and then finally pressure on dissenters to conform to group norms, which leads to poor decision making. One technique that's frequently used to produce creative decisions in working groups is known as brainstorming. The technique was first developed by Osborne in 1953 in an attempt to increase the effectiveness of group sessions in his advertising agency. Osborne had the idea that people might be able to effectively use their brains to storm a problem by sharing ideas with each other in a group. Osborne felt that creative solutions would be increased when the group members generated a lot of ideas and when judgments about the quality of those ideas were initially deferred and only later considered. As a result, brainstorming was based on the following rules. Each group member was to create as many ideas as possible, no matter how silly, unimportant, or unworkable they were thought to be. As many ideas as possible were to be generated by the group. No one was allowed to offer opinions about the quality of an idea, even their own. And the group members were encouraged to and expected to modify and expand upon others' ideas. Researchers have devoted considerable effort to testing the effectiveness of brainstorming. And yet, despite the creativeness of the idea itself, there's very little evidence to suggest that it actually works. In fact, virtually all individual studies, as well as a meta-analysis of those studies, find that regardless of the exact instructions given to a group, brainstorming groups don't generate as many ideas as one would expect, and the ideas that they do generate are usually of lesser quality than those generated by an equal number of individuals working alone who then share their own ideas and their results. Therefore, brainstorming represents still another example of a case in which, despite the expectation of a process gained by the group, a process loss is instead observed. A number of explanations have been proposed for the failure of brainstorming to be effective, and many of these have been found to be important. One obvious problem is social loafing by group members, and at least some research suggests that this does cause part of the problem. For instance, Paulus and Dizoulet in 1993 found that social loafing in brainstorming groups occurred in part because individuals perceived that other group members were not working very hard, and they matched their own behavior to these perceived norms. To test the role of social loafing more directly, Deal and Strobe in 1987 compared face-to-face brainstorming groups with equal numbers of individuals who worked alone. They found that face-to-face brainstorming groups generated fewer and less creative solutions than did an equal number of equivalent individuals working by themselves. However, for some of the face-to-face groups, the researchers set up a television camera to record the contributions of each of the participants in order to make individual contributions to the discussion identifiable. Being identifiable reduced social loafing and it increased the productivity of the individuals in the face-to-face groups, but the face-to-face groups still didn't perform as well as the individuals. Even though individuals in brainstorming groups are told that the quality of their idea is not to be evaluated, and therefore that all ideas are good ones, individuals might still be unwilling to state some of their ideas in brainstorming groups because they're afraid that they'll be negatively evaluated by other members of their group. When individuals are told that other group members are more knowledgeable than they are, they reduce their own contributions. And when they're convinced that when they're convinced that they themselves are experts, their contributions increase. Although social loafing and evaluation apprehension seem to cause some of the problem, the most important difficulty that reduces the effectiveness of brainstorming in face-to-face groups is that being with others in groups hinders opportunities for idea production and expression. In a group, only one person can speak at a time, and this can cause people to forget their own ideas because they're listening to others. Or it may cause them to miss what others are saying because they're thinking about their own ideas. This problem, which is caused entirely by the social situation of the group, is known as production blocking. Considered in another way, production blocking occurs because although individuals working alone can spend the entire available time generating ideas, participants in face-to-face groups must perform other tasks as well, and this reduces their own creativity. While brainstorming is a classic example of a group process loss, there are ways to make it more effective. One variation on brainstorming is known as nominal group technique. The nominal group technique capitalizes on the use of individual sessions to generate initial ideas, and this is followed by face-to-face group meetings to discuss and build on those ideas. In this approach, participants first work alone to generate and write down their ideas before the group discussion starts, and the group then records the ideas that are generated. In addition, a round-robin procedure is used to make sure that each individual has a chance to communicate his or her ideas. Other similar approaches to this include the Delphi technique and the synectics. Modern advances in technology have created the ability for individuals to work together on creativity tasks through computers. These computer systems, generally known as group support systems, are used in many businesses and other organizations. One use involves brainstorming on creativity tasks. Each individual in the group works at his or her own computer on the problem. As he or she writes suggestions or ideas, they're passed to other group members via the computer network. This way, each individual can see the suggestions of all the group members, and that includes their own. One common task of groups is to come to a consensus regarding a judgment or a decision, such as where to hold a party, whether a defendant is innocent or guilty, or how much money a corporation should invest in a new product. Whenever a majority of members in a group favors a given opinion, even if that majority is very slim, the group is likely to end up adopting that majority opinion. Of course, this result would be expected since, as a result of conformity pressures, the group's final judgment should reflect the average group member's initial opinions. Although groups generally do show pressure towards conformity, the tendency to side with the majority after the group decision turns out to be even stronger than the pressures of conformity. It's commonly found that groups make even more extreme decisions in the direction of the existing norm than anyone would predict, given the initial opinions of the group member. Group polarization is said to occur after when the discussion and the attitudes held by the individual group members become more extreme than before the group began discussing the actual topic at hand. Group polarization is a result of both cognitive and affective factors. The general idea of the persuasive argument approach to explaining group polarization is cognitive in orientation. This approach assumes that there's a set of potential arguments that support any given opinion, and another set of potential arguments that refute that opinion. But group polarization is in part based on the affective responses of the individual, and particularly the social identity they receive from being good group members. The idea here is that group members, in their desire to create positive social identity, attempt to differentiate their group from other implied or actual groups by adopting extreme beliefs. Therefore, the amount of group polarization observed is expected to be determined not only by the norms of the in-group, but also by a movement away from norms of other relevant out-groups. In short, this explanation says that groups that have well-defined or extreme beliefs are better able to produce social identity for their members than are groups that have more moderate and potentially less clear beliefs. As we've seen, it makes sense to use groups to make decisions because people create outcomes working together. People can't create outcomes working together that any one individual couldn't accomplish alone. In addition, once a group makes a decision, the group will normally find it easier to get other people to implement it because many people feel that decisions made by groups are fairer than those made by any one individual. And yet, as we've also seen, there are also many problems associated with groups that make it difficult for them to live up to their full potential. Training groups to perform more effectively is possible if appropriate techniques are used. Perhaps the first thing that we need to do is to remind our group members that groups aren't as effective as they sometimes seem. Group members often think that their group is being more productive than it actually is, and that their own groups are being particularly productive. For instance, people who participate in brainstorming groups report that they've been more productive than those who work alone, even if the group has actually not done very well at all. The tendency to overvalue the productivity of groups is known as the illusion of group effectivity, and it seems to occur for several reasons. For one, the productivity of the group as a whole is highly accessible, and this productivity generally seems quite good, at least in comparison with the contributions of single individuals. The group members hear many ideas expressed by themselves and the other group members, and this gives the impression that the group is doing very well, even if objectively it's not. And on the affective side, the group members receive a lot of positive social identity from their group memberships. These positive feelings naturally lead them to believe that their group is strong and performing well. Therefore, the illusion of group effectivity poses a severe problem for group performance, and we have to work to make sure that group members are aware of it. Just because we're working in groups doesn't mean that we're making good decisions or performing a task particularly well. It's important that group members, and particularly the group leader, always monitor group performance and attempt to motivate the group to work harder. Alright folks, this is going to conclude my third and final video covering Chapter 11 in Principles of Social Psychology, looking at working groups. So, performance and decision making. I hope you guys found it informative, and I'll see you guys in the next chapter.